Good morning, everyone. Welcome to panel 1B. My name is Gustavo, Grandal, Montero. I'm deputy editor of the ARLIS journal. I'm also a librarian based at the University of the Arts London, and I will be chairing the panel this morning. As you know, we have got three wonderful speakers this morning: Althea, Greenan, Kelly Davis, and Welsh. And they will present the presentations first. At the end, we'll have about 15 minutes for panel discussions and questions. So I'll ask you to reserve your questions for the end. The first speaker, as I say, is Althea Greenan from the Women's Art Library at Goldsmiths, University of London. And her presentation is from a slide collection to Feminist Network, digitising the Women's Art Library as deviant performance.
I always have this slide at the back, and it always gets, I run out of time and then nobody sees this last slide. And it's really a slide of thanks. When I began my research, I only had my own personal work experience and a kind of gut feeling that the Women's Art Library slide collection had a story to tell that was as important as the artwork it represented. And I was able to dare to think out of the box because of my experience, think out of the box of my experience, thanks to ARLIS and the people I met through this organization, notably somebody called Jenny Godfrey and the Acadians, who are the Association of Curators of Art and Design Images. They have a blog, and if you're interested in this kind of stuff, anything to do with slides, check them out. I'm also grateful to the artist Amelia Beavis Harrison, and apologies to people who may have seen this slide before. I can't start any presentation without showing it seems. She fashions me into an artwork. This photograph not only transforms me, it presents the Women's Art slide collection as a performance space, and the costume is designed as a performative object in itself, responding to how I describe my work as a curator. My description focused on the key objects around which the Women's Art Library was formed, the artist's slides. And like the heart of the tree, these slides reveal the beginning of the Women's Art Library, which began in the 1970s as a feminist slide registry. But slide collections have become endangered artifacts, and the costume refers to the fact that art college teaching slide collections have mostly been destroyed and disposed of. So here is this character. She's alone in what looks like a cold vault with her slides. This costume was made to be performed as a protagonist in a public cultural exchange. I wore it on the occasion of a conference about creating art from archives. I appear as a white figure, rising out of the dingy pink of deteriorating slide film, representing the shadows of an outmoded patriarchal art history. My head's framed by a symbolic slide mount, and I appear as a high priestess of the Women's Art Library, while in reality, I was actually in the middle of a PhD, struggling to retrieve my slide collection from the shadow of being a redundant technology. For me, it came down to one question. What else does this slide collection represent besides women's art? Although my day job includes looking after the slides, my research derives from being a fractious fan of this collection of images, of artworks, by artists no one knows. When the feminist art historian Catherine Grant describes fandom as a methodology in her forthcoming anthology, she notes how scholarly attention is fueled by identification and desire. And that's me. I'm longing for this collection of women artist slides to be recognized as a rich and unique information landscape. But it had become illegible, apparently locked in a redundant technology. I took on what I felt was the elephant in the room, the question of digitization. The inevitable shift to digital image resources not only led to the disposal of slide collections, it also marked the disenfranchisement of many older artists who struggled to deal with the universal digitization of art practice and art documentation. digitization imposed changes on how they physically participated in the art world, from slide making to handwriting. My research is forward-looking and questions how digitization might be reworked on behalf of the women artists who send slides to the Women's Art Library. The collection is the result of a network that was shaped by this format of information. Slides enabled artists to share work and occupy public cultural spaces, which in the case of women artists meant that the 35mm slide has an activist history as a tool for representing counter-narratives to dominant discourses in the art world. One of the first instances of a collection of slides of women's artwork being presented onto a public museum space was the 1970 unauthorized projection onto the Whitney Museum of American Art at the opening of its biennial. This event was described by Lucy Lippard as, quote, a nice twist on site specificity. Thanks to our efforts and of the Women's Art Slide Registry, the Whitney included 4 times as many women as they had before, end quote. This vision of the transgressive projection by feminist art activists is the backdrop to my research, considering the wall slide collection's relationship to digitization as a networked environment. I wanted to test the expectation that digitization would be the mechanism that secured the wall slide collection in the institution. My professional experience had not shown me a good example of how the collection's socio-political and cultural meaning might be represented in the digital cultural landscape. At present, the slide collection does not have a distinct online presence, but it is part of a, quote, digital knowledge model. That is, the Archive and Textiles catalog of Goldsmiths. At best, this finding aid takes the online researcher through a hierarchy to a mainly generic record description, individualized by the artist's name. But even if every one of the 35,000 plus slides had a catalog entry, my view is that the wall slide collection would remain misrepresented. Positioning the slide collection as just one of many forms of documentation in Goldsmiths' special collections fails to convey the central role of that slide collection as an activist feminist slide registry around which the Women's Art Library was built. Although written descriptions can reiterate the historical background of the Women's Art Library, this partial digital representation will not convey the significance of aggregating women artist slides and how they perform as a defiant entity. As Jane Birkin notes in her Jane Birkin is an art librarian, excellent work comparing photographic archive cataloging with performative artwork, archive descriptions are a writing system that manages and reconceives the collection. This something other than a narrative gaze suggests that once a collection is archived, it is frozen away from the urgent narrative of everyday life and politics. But it also evokes the power of the list. And her remark about the performative aspect of catalogs suggests a way to read the text artists handwrote on their slide mounts. It resonates with names, dimensions, dates, titles. The artist's descriptions, while brief, uneven, and repetitive, nevertheless construct as something other than a narrative. And these slide mounts form a meta-text that literally sits in the margins of the slide and persists as an artist's construction rather than an institution's. In contrast to the online record I showed earlier, here's a photograph of one of Beth Higgins' slides. I was experimenting with how to make a digital image of a slide, including the slide mount. It demonstrates how an artist's slide tells a story not only through its image, but through the artist's writing and use of spaces. This photograph shows how an artist's slide is a convergence of practices and led me to formulate the question, what else does this slide collection represent besides artwork? There are over 31 linear meters of slide files, And you can imagine how often I am asked if there are any plans to digitize them. And my answer is that we did try once. I scanned 1,200 slides from over 75 artists using a single load slide scanner for this pilot website designed to produce a digitized opportunity to browse artist slide files. Images, titles, and text were hyperlinked along with the artist names to lead users through the material to discover themes and increase content by tagging. Without a plan for technical sustainability, the website itself became an archive after 5 years, and some of it is stored in the Wayback Machine in the Internet Archive. But the project had failed before this point of technical expiry, and it is this failure which inspires my research question. When artists were brought into a focus group to comment on the website, their main criticism was that the slide had curated their work. The site, rather, not the slide, had curated their work. Instead of connecting users to the joy of the material, the artists felt that the website had broken down the integrity of the artist files and interfered with how the artists represented themselves. The Wall slide collection resists digitization and makes it problematic because of the discourses that can be suppressed in the process. The material shift from a physical entity to an online proliferation of images raises questions about the politics of visibility related to knowledge production. Talking about the Google Art project, Katrina Sloyce points out that the problem that we face is the opacity of the interface, that screen, and the absolute opacity of how these images come to the screen. And I agree with her that it is dangerous because it is too easy for the collection of images titled Women's Art to be decontextualized and seen or used as a reductive account of women's art practice. The African Asian Visual Arts Archive is described as the most comprehensive slide archive of contemporary visual art by artists of African and Asian descent working in the UK since the post-war period. This is an example of how a politically conceived slide collection is made accessible online. The slide's transparency is scanned and displayed like an illustration of the text, explaining what the image represents. This process extracted the images from their original format and edits out the originating material of the archive. And like the website Artwork Live, these digitized collections edit out the slide's mounts. This is a photograph from one of my slide walks. The slide walk is a digitizing research practice that I devised, blunt instrument of digitization, a handheld camera. Instead of using a screen to browse images online, I used the digital camera to browse a physical slide collection and used that process to generate digital research material. I activated random sections of the Wall slide collection by producing digital data in a way that bypasses standard digitization routines and introduces the subjectivity of the digitizer, photographer, performer, to question the precision or intelligibility of digital reproduction. I drew on social scientists such as Tim Ingold and Sarah Pink, who theorize how knowledge is produced as a shared experience through movement, tracing, and embodiment. I was retracing the steps women took to document their artwork so that I could perform and visualize the Wall slide collection as a feminist collective endeavor. Rejecting the scanner to work a camera over a light box signaled my agency as a feminist photographer reproducing images of women's art. Reflecting on how academic discourse is formed, cultural theorist Dwight Conkerwood describes performative as the kind of action that, quote, incessantly interrupts, interrogates, and antagonizes powerful master discourses, end quote. My work was to interrupt the powerful drag of mass digitization. The slide walks interrogate the idea of a seamless, transparent digitization for slide collections by introducing the presence of the digitizer as well as the slide maker. The images are crude, and show the texture of fairly bad spontaneous digital imaging, as well as the masking tape and corrections. In the context of my research, these images are definitely a form of critical digitization. Critical digitization is a gift of a term formulated by the group of practitioners from museums, libraries, and archives that you can see in the reference. I hope you can see it. If anybody wants these references, I'm happy to share. By distinguishing between mass and critical digitization, the authors describe many variations of digitization tasks that I have carried out on slides in my professional career, as well as my research, responding to different needs and purpose. This is how I see the aberrant digitization of the slide walks, how they produce a version of critical digitization. My digital images create a new depth of understanding the slide collection rather than replicating it definitively. The slide walks, digitized slides, bring into view the intensely expressive and laborious inscriptions of the slide's mounts, the hidden labor of art practice. And I made use of my images to digitally enhance and reveal a new digital image of the collection. This is it. This instigated a series of alternative performances of the analog material to engage with a new layer of text revealed by the digital work of stripping out images. The work showed how artists produced a new syntax using the varying spaces of the slide mount, the artist file, and the library itself. The artist is writing her name, naming her work, and establishing sequences and chronologies, and the slide mount was a space for artists to write their timelines and inscribe themselves as practicing artists into a critical feminist art history. So this is where my aberrant digitization brought me. I now saw the artist's writing as a performative text that constitutes the women's art slide collection as much as the images. I transcribed the text from a selection of slides onto blank slide mounts and distributed these at a dinner for people to call out the artist's names as I replied with the title of the work. I was playing with the idea of projecting the text to an audience much as I would project slides, taking my inspiration from the work of Claire Gasson, who created a durational work for 8 vocalists to pronounce the name of every woman artist represented in the Women's Art Library collection, including all the books, press cuttings, and of course, the slides. So this is the bit where I was hoping to play film, but it's not going to connect with the actual video. Maybe we don't have. Do we have time? This thing just runs.
Yeah, you do have time.
Okay. This thing just runs as I talk. So if we can come out of this, come out of this. Sorry about this. Hopefully it will. It doesn't like it. Okay. No worries. That's okay. That's okay. What that would have been is just more the slide files that were made into a film that was in a presentation at Margate, and it was set up on a projector on the floor. It was just projected onto a wall and people walked through it, and it's just a series of slides just running along. By testing the performativity of the wall slide in digital and analog spaces, I'm not looking for a collective message from these artists, but a sense of what the collection does and keeps doing. Digitizing by watching the slides through my camera as I walked through the collection made me focus on each one, each as a single utterance, a formed thought that works in the context of other slides to produce a unique space in which to experience women's art. Through this alternative digitization, I came to understand that slides were the artist's means of participation in a political feminist project of visibility. Not every artist would identify as a feminist artist, but their actions of organizing and professionalizing their art practices by making and disseminating slides was their way of participating in social change. They established a network reproducing women's art practice by securing their images in the framework of a slide registry, and it was an alternative institution. They adapted their art practices to include the workflow of slide making and submitting slides, and sometimes once, often year after year, submitting these slides to the Women's Art Library. The slide collection was achieved through this performative aspect of art practice that women artists engaged in as self-archivists. And now, when I look at these carefully inscribed photographic objects, I see the result of everyday political actions. The impossibility of a slide collection coming into full view drives fantasies of long-playing projections or backlit caverns lined with slides. But what does come into view during my research is the slide collection as a feminist construct of politicized information landscape. By bringing the artist-maker into view, this aberrant digitization visualized how these slides generate a collective entity beyond the individual artist's file. I also experienced how digitizing images is a culturally loaded performance of the image object, in this case, the slide. And by unpicking this performance, I recovered artist slide writing as work, in fact, net work. This unique set of slides coheres and reads as a collective action to produce a uniquely critical space. It is not just the daunting number of slides that make this collection resist digitization. It is how digitization would need to reproduce how the slides continue to speak to us so vividly of women's art practice. A rhetorical space, as described by Lorraine Code, the feminist philosopher, is a textured location where it matters who is speaking and where and why, and where such mattering bears directly upon the possibility of knowledge claims. The idea of a collection producing a rhetorical space is critical, not only in theory, but also in practice, because it enriches how other collections are used. The women's WRPN is a music collection that was built up by the feminist music distributors Women's Revolutions Per Minute, and this is a collection that's also in the special collections of Goldsmiths. These WRPN was active at the same time as the Women's Art Library, and actually from the late 70s to the early 2000s. And it was actually came to Goldsmiths because the person who was responsible for it was sitting in special collections and noticed there was this whole collection of art books relating to women's art. The Women's Art Library is a special collection, and it has a digitally networked profile produced using systems of description that enable it to serve as an invaluable source of information on women's art. But its slide collection resists being transmediated into digitized information. And instead, this material recalls us to its physical bulk and minute detail to invoke the political nature of information management and its relationship to cultural heritage. So this is our last slide. The visibility of women's art practice today is more linked than ever before to how it is represented in our libraries and special collections thanks to digital scholarship. And this should lead us to question more broadly how politically formed collections continue to speak critically to our digitally evolved information landscape. Of course, not everything can be digitized, but rather than pushing for digitization to retrieve collections from obscurity, it is worth bearing in mind that there are collections, like the Wall Slide collection, that are saying more about contemporary culture and projecting further into the future at the very moment they appear to be left behind. Thank you.
Okay, our next speaker is Getty Davis. She is based at the Getty Provenance Index, and her presentation is Information Icebergs, Restructuring Legacy Metadata for the 21st Century.
Okay, so I'm Kelly Davis. I'm a metadata specialist with the Getty Provenance Index, which is a program of the Getty Research Institute in Los Angeles. Today I'm going to talk about the challenges of updating a scholarly database, the Getty Provenance Index, to 21st century standards in the context of a project that's converting the index to linked open data. The Getty Provenance Index is a set of 8 databases that together contain more than 2 million records. We cover mostly Western European art, especially painting, from the 16th to the early 20th century. The databases comprise information from primary source documents, such as archival inventories, auction sale catalogs, and here the example is a digitized dealer stock book. We were originally established in the 1980s as a book series, and the databases were designed to support production of print publications. And that system has been in continuous use now for more than 30 years. Over time, the content has changed from print books to CDs and then to the web in 1999. And the databases developed to support those changes, but it's still the same information system. And in this 30-year period, there's been countless staff, interns, volunteers, and outside contributors all working on the same data sets. And the project that I'm talking about is the Linked Open Data Remodel. It is a complete conceptual and technical overhaul of the Provenance Index. It's a 3-year project, we're 2 years in right now, by the Getty Research Institute to redesign the infrastructure of the databases and produce new research initiatives in the fields of provenance, collecting, and art markets. The goals of our project: to improve accessibility, both by making the public interface more user-friendly and by making it easier to download large sets of data. Improve usability, break down the silos of the 8 multiple databases. Strengthen conceptual and material relationships between the data in our Provenance Index and related primary source materials that the Getty Research Institute holds in special collections. And in the course of this project, we are producing a new data model that's based on the CDOC CRM conceptual reference model. The data model is being developed in conjunction with other cultural heritage institutions and is documented at a public website, linked.art. We'll have a Sparkle endpoint for querying the linked open data directly. We have been releasing data sets on GitHub so researchers can begin using the normalized and standardized data in advance of the launch of the new system. We'll have a new technical infrastructure, including a new web interface and a new internal staff editorial system. And we'll be enhancing the data by linking to external authorities for our people, places, and things. Currently, the Provenance Index databases exist as a flat file database with 1 record for each item sold in an auction, or 1 record for each row in a dealer's stock book. So to convert this data to linked data is a paradigm shift, and it moves our focus from the relationships between elements, moves our focus to the relationship between elements within the database records. So the example on this slide shows the contrast between a flat record on the left and semantic triples that represent 2 different facts about Van Gogh's irises. Instead of fields with strings that represent data values, we will describe things with URIs as their identities. The links to things will let us link to our own things in the Provenance Index, to things in the collection of the Getty Museum, or to other people's things about artists, artworks, locations, and so on. And I highly recommend checking out link.art for full documentation that's constantly being updated. So modeling the data starts with an understanding of what we have and how the elements vary. In the Provenance Index, we have databases ranging from 1.3 million records from auction sale catalogs to about 80,000 records from the stock books of 2 art dealers, Gupilazzi and the Nodler Gallery, and 30,000 records from archival inventory lists. Our goal is to develop a single model for the transactions or events represented in these diverse databases. In order for linked data to work effectively, we not only need a data model that suits the data we have, but the data needs to be standardized and tidy. Although the Provenance Index is carefully curated and edited, the changes in editorial guidelines, staff, and preferences of the fields over these 30 years have produced legacy data that must be standardized, and in some cases restructured to fit with our new CRM-based model. Because of these efforts for the project, layers of legacy issues have been exposed. Some of the challenges we've encountered working with our data include inconsistent capitalization and formatting, missing data, or invalid data. But there have been many other deeper challenges. When we first started, we had a few showdowns between our content specialists and the tech team, the software team. It's a traditional divide in our field, but we've been doing pretty well with it. But when the project first got started, we had an intellectual quandary in the comment section of a Jira ticket, number 108. If you don't know Jira, it's a project management ticketing tracking platform. We've been using it to keep track of our data cleaning tasks. So the first data set that we standardized was data from the Nodler Gallery stock books. Our data scientist created a Jira ticket, number 108, just asking how the linked data model would express reattributions of artists. Of course, reattribution is incredibly common in art history. The current system attaches a modifier to the artist's name. Since every entry has its own record, the same object later attributed to a different artist is in no way linked to the original record. In linked data, those types of separations collapse. The tech specialist explained that the model would work by replacing the original attribution with the new correct attribution. Imagine the collective gasp of art historians at this. I mean, you just can't do that. But the tech team insisted, it's not correct. It's not true in the objective reality of 2018. And we, the Getty, can't make false assertions. But of course that misses the nature of the historical documents, which are often riddled with errors and fully open to interpretation. The Provenance Index never intended to provide an objective truth in the way a museum is responsible for provenance of their own collection. Instead, the Provenance Index describes the historical reality at the time of the document. And so this simple question about reattributions quickly hit the very essence of the project, and a huge philosophical question. What is our purpose? What are we modeling, the objects or the documents? Where does being faithful to the source document end and specialist judgments begin? It highlights how impossible it is to build a 100% neutral database. Editors are making judgments and decisions constantly, and there's rarely data on what is the rote transcription and what has been tweaked over time. Anyway, these kinds of discussions can make quickly one feel like this. I'm happy to share that in this particular case, the art historians won. It showed that provenance information and art historical in general is by nature ambiguous, unclear, and unobjective. So one of our mandates from the remodel is to enhance or reconcile our data with external authorities shared amongst other institutions. The Provenance Index has traditionally maintained our own authorities. More on that in a minute. So this record is actually from the front end of the Provenance Index, and I've highlighted the fields that we're reconciling to the Getty vocabularies. And we choose the Getty vocabularies for two main reasons. It's a Getty program, obviously. They're on our floor. They're down the hallway from us, so we can talk to them quite easily. And also, the data is already in linked open data. So you land the union list of artist names. That's the text highlighted in blue, and basically it's all the people. In linked open data parlance, we call them actors. This is singular artists acting on their own, like Corot, but it can also be institutions or dealers like Agnew's. TGN, the source of geographic names, highlighted in yellow. We have a lot of location information in the Provenance Index, and tagging these locations gives researchers the ability to create maps, which is a natural type of visualization for this kind of information. AAT, the art and architecture thesaurus, for descriptive metadata, that's in red. So all the objects are tagged by Provenance Index editors with what type of object they are, painting, drawing, etc. And they have assigned art historical values to their subject and genre, like landscape, or military. The AAT will also cover our units of currency and dimensions. And reconciling to these entities has in some cases been very easy, very straightforward, and in other cases much more difficult. One of the recurring themes of this project has been these things are not what they say they are, i.e. situations where we think we know what a field or record is representing and is documented to be representing, but when we investigate what's actually there, we find nothing of what we've expected. I call it the information iceberg problem. It makes assessing cleanup tasks very difficult to put on a timeline or to estimate whose skills might be needed. As this is all brand new, there's no precedent to rely on. While the example here is pretty straightforward, trying to reconcile different typos, spellings of Flemish to the AAT culture Flemish, it illustrates how much variety in the data there is and how difficult it is to use an automated process to standardize, that so much of this needs to be done manually. So I mentioned that the Provenance Index has had its own internal authorities. These are two back-end examples of what I would call ideal authority records. These are known persons that can be definitively identified so that we can say confidently that P. Palmer in a verbatim source document is Potter Palmer, the Chicago businessman. Over time, however, the Provenance Index team created more than 50,000 authority records, split and not linked across two databases, one for artists and one for owners, like buyers and sellers. So you could often have one record in artists for the same person that's also in the owner's database. Those three fields, artists, buyers, and sellers, are controlled in the current content databases, and they validate from the content record against the authority record via a verbatim name. Our current software system wants an authority. So it's going to alert you every single time you enter in a verbatim that doesn't have an authority. And so as a result of that, they created lots of authority records for unidentified people, for unknown people, for anonymous people, and so on. And so there's a lot of problems with that haven't come out until now as we're changing the data structure. So here's the first example of a problematic record. It's been working just fine with our current system, but it's not going to work moving forward. So the problematic part here, the authority record was created as a placeholder for all unidentified persons named Berger. So it could be Berger in the 20th century in New York, or Berger in 1795 in Germany. It's both and all of the Bergers. So authorities are meant to be for one person, one entity, one company, distinguishable from other similar entities. And there's about 500 records just like this in the current system. That's just a last name. Use this if you don't know who they are. And then we have a different kind of problematic record. Art history is, of course, many dynasties, both with artists and collectors. So which authority record would you choose for JP Morgan if the source wasn't clear about it being junior or senior? To work around that problem, the Provenance Index editors created generic records for many of the dynasty names here. So this, you would choose this record if you didn't know, and it could be either JP1 or JP2. And then, a slightly different problem, an artist authority, the British 18th century. This encompasses any artist who was British and worked in the 18th century, but is unnamed in the source. So that's potentially a lot of people. As I said, if we were to continue using our current system, these kinds of records would not be a problem. But we're switching to the ULAN for our authorities, and ULAN is very specific and clear about what kinds of records they create and accept. Actually, this project has forced ULAN to accept a more broad and generic type of record, to the point that they now have a hierarchy called unidentified unknown people. Beyond ULAN being more flexible, the model can accommodate these situations in a way that our current database cannot. For example, it can express an artist as a member of a nationality acting within a certain time period. Therefore, users can still search for an unnamed artist, like 18th century British, but one single authority will not be representing all of them. For a situation like JP1 or 2, the model is flexible. A function of CDOC is the ability to attach multiple people to an event with associated qualifiers. So JP1 or 2 would instead look like in a more high-tech fashion, possibly JP1, possibly JP2. And then going back to the original example for all persons named Berger, we're not pointing to ULAN at all because there simply isn't enough information to have any kind of authority. It still uses our person model, but it doesn't point to a ULAN ID. Instead, we would fill out, instead the unknown entity is every time given their own unique resource identifier, URI, and as much information can be filled out will be. So a lot of room for future research. So I want to show an example of data cleaning that has been, it's really incredibly important, probably one of the highest return on investments that we've had, but it definitely took the most amount of time, over a year of painstaking manual research. The Knoedler stockbook numbers. This is a portrait of Mrs. Mary Ann Fitzherbert by Gainsborough, currently hangs in the Legion of Honor Museum in San Francisco. She was bought and sold several times by M. Knoedler & Co., one of the preeminent New York galleries in the 20th century. This is a screenshot of the digitized stockbook where the painting first appears. So there's several pieces of information here. First, you have the artist name, Gainsborough, and title. Above that, it says Trotty & Co., which is the seller at the time, and a date of March 1907. There's also some price information, and several numbers, one just to the left and then 3 below. The most prominent number there on the left, 11381, is the stock number this Gainsborough was given when she was originally purchased in 1907, this entry. But there's 3 numbers below there, and those are a series of alternate numbers for this painting. But it's not all of the alternate numbers for this painting. So the next time we see her, it's 1912, and they actually purchased her back from who they had sold her to 2 years before. And now she's a different number, 12698. Well, that wasn't on the previous slide, in case you didn't notice, but it wasn't. The original number, 11381, is also written next to Gainsborough, but none of those other numbers are there. It's just these 2. So the third time we see her, she has an even newer number, 13541. There's other numbers, again, but there's one that we've never even seen before, which is 5897. So if we just assumed that the 5897 written there was another stock number for this painting, you would actually be wrong, because that's not, that's the number for this Domingo Muñez painting, stock number 587. And Knoedler was really good about not giving 2 objects the same number. However, one object could have up to 8 alternate numbers. So because of discrepancies like this, we have to check how we're matching up objects in case we've recorded a stock number incorrectly. Or in this case, 5897 is the number that was given to this painting by the London branch of Knoedler. And our database is the New York branch. So those stockbooks aren't in our database, and there's actually only a handful of them because there was a fire in the London branch. So we don't have them. They're digitized, but not in the database. So going back to the Odyssey of Mrs. Fitzherbert, she shows up on commission in 1935 with a CA number, C for commission. A was a prefix that Knoedler started using in 1927. Here's a screenshot, has a lot of her other numbers written. And then finally here, her very last appearance, final number, and this is when she was sold to the Legion of Honor, 1941. So the Knoedler stockbook numbers have been majorly important, yet an extremely uninspiring task. The main reason behind that is because when the books were transcribed from 2012 to 2015, the editors didn't realize what all those extra numbers meant, and they were only haphazardly transcribed. So the only thing to do was hire a research assistant on a grant to go back through every single page of 11 stockbooks spanning 1871 to 1970 and reunite all the objects, and she's actually just finished that. This was such a tedious task but extremely important for linked data. If we didn't now have the alternate stock numbers for each object, we wouldn't be able to link those objects' timelines together. As it is now, there's not always an obvious sign that the record you're viewing in Nodler might not be the only time this object has appeared. And to wrap up, show you an overview of where the project is at right now. There's 1 year left. We've completed the majority of the data cleaning right now. All that's left is our data set of archival inventories, so that it remains to be seen what new challenges that might pose. So thank you, and here's some resources I highly recommend checking out.
Thank you, Kay. That was really illuminating. Next up is Welsh from University College London, and her presentation is the following thing a book, Humument as work in progress, Gesamtkunstwerk, and the definition of the work in library cataloguing.
Okay, thank you very much. So I don't know how clear the slides are at the back. So on the left is the title page of the first commercial edition of The Humument by Tom Phillips. And what I want to talk about today is a little bit of a think piece. So a think piece in the sense that I'm thinking through all of these thoughts. It was brilliant to hear that last paper about linked data, because those of us in the library cataloguing world are busy grappling, as we all know, with similar issues. And there's something quite inspiring about people in a sort of big commercial setting also coping with those same issues. So we've had a new release of RDA Beta this summer, which has caused quite a furore and causing many of us to think. So I'm using this to think through. And a little bit of a caveat. So this is my first ARLIS conference. I'm not an art historian, I'm not an art librarian. I'm a bibliographer, and I have to say cataloguing theorist now because I don't work in a library, so I don't catalogue anymore. And so I was introduced to Tom's work by Nancy Campbell, the book artist and poet, back in 2008. And my interest is quite bizarre, really, although perhaps not to the people in this room, because 2008 was the year that we saw what RDA was going to look like for the first time when they released a PDF of it. And I felt quite uncomfortable with the examples that were chosen to go into that initial release, because they were all quite easy. And as an educator, I'm always quite wary of systems that only show how to do easy things. I think when we teach somebody something, the instinct is to make it easy on them. But I think certain technical skills, not just cataloguing, but definitely cataloguing, suffer from it being made easy by looking at easy examples. And so I was talking to Nancy about this and how, the challenges that I was facing in the book I was writing, became practical cataloguing. And she said, have you come across the work of Tom Phillips? Because the great myth of library cataloguing is that there was this golden era between 1950, when ISBNs came into use, and about 1970. And the story that's told to young people, and I was a young person once that was told this story too, is that in that era, publishers followed the rules, by which it's implied the library rules. Right? I always felt uncomfortable with this because I suspected that, like all golden age sagas, there never was a golden time. There were always things going on that challenged these rules. And in fact, with my background as a literary scholar, that's what art is, that's what literature is, that's what human curiosity is somebody sets up a bunch of rules and somebody else comes along and goes, no, surely there must be another way to do it. So Tom's work was fantastic because it started in 1966, right in the high point of library cataloguing, when everybody was following the rules. And Tom's representative of a group of artists and publishers and makers and writers and poets who didn't care what the rules were. And then the more I looked at Tom's work, the more I saw actually here's somebody that cares very much what the rules are and deliberately sets out to challenge them. So my interest in the Humument is quite weird. because it's a something that challenges the rules. So this is a work, I'm challenging today the word work. It's a work of art which exists in different formats. So some of them are unique objects, like the V&A has a set of globes that don't exist anywhere else in the world that are covered with text from a Humument. But core within all of the Humument stuff are these commercially produced artist books, originally set by Hans-Jörg Meyer and then distributed and taken over by Thames and Hudson. And that was at the core of what was trying to be achieved. So for me, this was a lightning moment, and people who've been taught by me probably get sick of Tom Phillips and the Humument because I use it in teaching all the time. And if you're interested in that, there's a wonderful art publication which will be known to everyone in the room that very kindly published an article on this in 2016. And that came out of a conference paper that for me was a lightning bulb moment. I always tell students it's really important to find your tribe. And for me, I was lucky as a librarian because I found my tribe straight away. I was a cataloguer. And as a librarian, it was really simple. And if I was still a cataloguer now, my life would be really simple because I would be grappling with what do we do about RDA, when do we move to RDA. That was my tribe. And as an academic, I found my tribe quite hard. So I became an academic in 2008, 2009. And it wasn't until 2015 when I went to a youth practice conference in Cardiff that I thought, yeah, these are my teapot. I understand what they're doing and why they're doing it, and they understand what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. I can talk to them in shorthand. So this took me in a completely different direction because I'm not a cataloguer, right? I'm an academic, and I'm paid to challenge this, and I'm going to use the word shit that's come out this summer from our International Standards Committee. Because cataloguers can't. Cataloguers have to do the cataloguing, right? So we're in a bad way, and I think art is the way forward. And so the way that I think about stuff is coming out of the discipline of bibliography. Now I'm not saying that's a good thing. In any of my writing, if you see the word seminal, it's a bit of a double-edged sword. It means it's hugely influential, but I am a militant feminist, and I know what I mean when I use the seeming word of somebody, right? So this is a very beardy, weirdy, testosterone-driven discipline that's been around for about 400 years, really came into prominence in the 20th century by blokes who were very much blokes. And I don't think that they would have liked me, and I certainly wouldn't have liked them in real life. But I've been dealing with these chaps and their thoughts. They've been inside my head since I started St Andrews when I was 16. So anything that I say, the limits of my research is the limits of my own discipline. And I try to get out of it and come to things like this, hoping that you lovely art people will tell me different ways of thinking. And there's different types of bibliography. And I have been known, both drunk and sober, to claim that cataloguing is a form of descriptive bibliography. And I used to, before RDA happened to us, I used to be able to say, with the omission of the word all, it was not our responsibility to describe all the evidence about the book. It was our job as librarians to describe what we had in our hands and to contextualise it as best we could. And the beardy, weirdy blokes agreed with me, right? Bowers, who's one of the greats of bibliography, talks about the difference between the cataloguer and the bibliographer. And there's a lot that's bandied about at the moment because RDA has suddenly become interested in rare books and special collections about how the work is the same as the ideal copy. And here's a really good, pithy definition, I'm using the word pithy within the world of bibliography, of ideal copy. And it's not quite the same as the work. Greg at the bottom there sort of says what we should transcribe. And it's not, the ideal copy is not something that ever really existed, unless the printer and publisher got it absolutely right, which in the early modern period they almost never ever did. But note who the actor is. The actor is the publisher. And that's key, because this way of thinking comes out of the early modern studies, it comes out of Shakespearean studies. It's about determining transmission. The core of bibliography is about production, reproduction and transmission, and it's the publisher that they're interested in. So most of you will have seen Darnton's communication circuit. He never claimed that these were the only actors, or as we would say in modern RDA terms, agents, who could be involved in the production of books. But these are certainly some of the main players. And you can see up here, the author and the publisher is a two-way arrow. So it could be the publisher kicking it off, or it could be the author. Within artist books, obviously we've got artists who are acting as authors and sometimes also acting as publishers. And I think that's quite interesting. So here's the hill on which I will die as the basis to what we used to do in cataloguing. Our methods of procedure were all about taking all the aspects of the item being described that we could and putting them together. And we were told where we could take that information from. And there's a lot talked about this and about, what we should be doing nowadays and where we should be looking for information. And what's not talked about an awful lot is workflow. And that's what controls everything that happens in the library. Well, money controls what happens in the library, and then workflow based on what we have budget for, right? So a lot of these decisions that were made, there's a lot of AACR2 bashing going on at the moment from quite high up people in the cataloguing world. And I think it's quite unfair, because do you know what these people never forgot? They never forgot that they were librarians. They might be also cataloguing theorists, but they were librarians, and they had to think about workflow. And everybody that they were writing for had to think about workflow. 1998 happened. Functional requirements for bibliographic records happened. Every time I mention that, I point to William Denton's fantastic observation that this way of thinking that we are now seemingly becoming entrenched in is an end point to 175 years of thinking about cataloguing, not the end point. There are alternative futures, there are alternative ways of doing it, and I will be even bolder and say that the RDA Committee's complete decision to ignore large constituents of our library cataloguing community, small libraries, special libraries, libraries which are largely staffed by people who are perhaps not qualified as librarians and have never done a standard cataloguing course, means that many of us will be forced into an alternative future in which we are not interacting with these big international standards anymore. But it's okay, because this is not the only way to do it. Most of us know this. The great joy is you have a workshop. If those of you who are really interested in what a work expression manifestation item is, there's a workshop going on, and I'm sure you will have signed up for it. This is a standard diagram, the standard way in which we have been told since 1998 that this was a new way of thinking. We've been told since 1998. People have put themselves in the mind of the great people who founded our system and said that the only reason they didn't do this is because they didn't have the technology. To which I say, go to the archives and show me Jewett and show me Cutter and show me the people who came up with these theories, which we are now overturning, and where they said that. Show me where they didn't recognise that they were thinking intellectually about something on various levels, right? So we have always had something going on here around this idea of the work. And we've had to find a way to unite people with the resources they're seeking using our description of it. That's what cataloguing is. That's all cataloguing is, right? That is what cataloguing is. So here's a concrete example that I always use. I pick on Mary Shelley and Frankenstein because we have documents in which she identifies as the creator of Frankenstein. So that's straightforward. We have a creator. And she writes about how this idea of the work came into her head. So she's lovely because she fits into this model. The model of Lemmy, the model of Ferber, the model of the IFRA library reference model, the model of RDA on which it is founded is romantic with both a capital and a lowercase r. So she fits into it. She takes authorial responsibility for something that is a work in a way that we can now backwards engineer and say, yeah, we would call it a work too, Mary. Thanks for that, Dawn. So it's existing somewhere up here, disembodied. It's not an ideal copy because she's not a publisher, she's a writer, but it's existing up here and she expresses it. And it becomes a thing. And in this case, it was a text that she completed. they say, in one night in 1817. And then it was made manifest in 2 different publications. And then below that we have things that have maybe got provenance information, the actual copy of the 1818 Frankenstein that some of us might have in our libraries. So that's great, that works, right? So you can go home and that's, I know how to catalogue now, I know what this model is. Karen Coyle, who I have great admiration for as a theorist, and one of the things I admire about her is she's bloody good at rhetoric, right? I went to school in Scotland, if you can't tell from the accent, and we were still, I'm old, so we were still taught rhetoric from this age, right? Scottish people can give you an opinion about anything, and whether you will ever find out what we actually think is a whole other matter, because certainly as old Scottish people we're taught rhetoric, and Coyle is great at rhetoric, right? She's great at rhetoric, like only a mediocre, white, heterosexual, middle-class male is normally good at rhetoric, right? Ladies and non-cis people, spot the tricks here. You might think that a key concept like work would be well understood in libraries and uncontroversial. Would we? Would I think that? I think I'm being told what I think. And I'm being told that if I turn around and say, that's not what I think actually, Karen, I'm being controversial. And I'm being the first person to be controversial. And I bloody am, right? You might also assume libraries would have integrated this basic concept into their services and procedures. So there's a criticism there. We don't know what a work is, and we haven't integrated it. So when someone comes looking for Frankenstein, until we Ferberized everything, until we found RDA, I don't know what it is, I don't know how to find it, right? The work was always there. Like, you know, there's that kind of awful film from the 1980s with Arnold Schwarzenegger, and the great, I won't name it because some people might not have seen it, for those of you that have, the great reveal is that the rebel leader was buried inside all the time. There's a kind of unborn twin that bursts forth. Well, I'm here to say, in quite a gross way, the work was there all along. I could go to Jewett's card catalogue records that still exist, and I could show you the work, right? I don't need to concertina it out. I have no need. I'm not creating linked data. I'm helping people to find stuff. And what the linked data community wants to do, I want to help them, but that's not who I am. That's not my primary audience, right? But she's correct here. Instead, the integration of the work into library practices is in the second decade of the 21st century, still in our future. So this thing, A hasn't happened, B should happen, and C is going to happen. Okay. And then she quotes Smraglia. I love Smraglia. Smraglia is probably one of the best cataloguing theorists, theory being the appropriate word. A catalogue inventory of books must, here's another good bit of credit, must give way to an encyclopedia catalogue of works. So we're now no longer saying this is what we've got, you can come and see what we've got, both physically and virtually. We're now saying, we're taking on universal bibliography, guys. We're no longer just cataloguing what we've got in our hands. So if you come looking for that thing, you can find it. We are now going to tell you everything that we can find out about the context of that thing. That's what we're doing. That's what we must do. That's now our mission as library cataloguers. We don't have more staff. We don't have more time. We don't have more anything. So over the summer there's been a lot of talk about the IFLA library reference model and its embedding within RDA. The great news for people like me who have to teach this stuff in September, or like you who have to do this stuff at work, is not only is it beta in the sense it's going to be beta for a year, you need to worry about it for a year, you haven't even finished writing it. How you finish writing something that's in beta, I don't know, but maybe I'm just too educated in Greek, I don't know. But not until the 18th of December, 2018, will we know exactly what these people think. But this still exists, this hierarchy still exists, and work, given expression, made manifest, and then becoming the item we have in our hands. So to come back to Humument, here's a nice, easy example of my copy of the 5th edition of the Humument. So there's the work, there's the expression, the commercial edition from Thames and Hudson. It's made manifest by the publisher. Then at my item level, there's a nice inscription from Tom for the bibliographers at UCL. And all of the people running down the side are what RDA would call agents, what in bibliography we would call actors, right? So Humument's nice because we have a definite creator. Tom Phillips has stepped up to the plate and said, this is a thing that I have created. But do we have a nice, discrete thing that is the work? That's the issue. So if you haven't seen a Humument, having just seen that diagram, or having seen a record created following that diagram, this is what you may expect. You may not have predicted the maroon, but you would have expected something like this. I told you it was a book. There's a nice flat picture of a book, right? So it's an altered text. In '66, he was strolling along with a mate, took a bet that you can make art from anything, picked up an old crappy, turned out to be anti-Semitic, which he's a bit embarrassed about, novel, for threepence, and made art from it. That's the story of a Humument. And it exists in various book editions. There was what he refers to as a private press edition by Tetrad Press, which they have at the V&A and various other places. There's the Thames and Hudson, which us poor people can afford to buy, in 6 editions now. There's an abridged book called Heart of a Humument. There's loads and loads and loads of prints. There's a USB with an audio recorder of Tom's very posh, very Oxford-educated dulcet tones reading it, which I highly recommend over my own. There's a web app, celestial globes, there's a skull, which he's always very keen to say covered inside and out, because I think technically it's probably, I'm not an artist, but it's quite hard to get in the nooks and crannies of a skull. And lately he's actually done a desk from his old school and covered that in text from a Humument. And there he is at work in his studio. One of the things that's really, really nice about a Humument is he thinks about this stuff, right? So on his website he says, a Humument has been a work in progress. Uh-oh, what's a work? What's a work in progress? Where does it start? 1966. Where does it end? Guess what? Tom himself doesn't know. He said the last edition was the final edition. There was great kind of coverage at Royal Academy of Arts that went on display, went up to Yorkshire, was displayed up there in Stearns House. And it's still a work in progress because then he saw this desk and thought, I must cover it with text from Humument, right? So it's a work, but it doesn't have an end point yet. He'll die at some point, and then that will definitely be an end point. Right? Not that I'm wishing for that anytime soon. And then he says, this section brings together a wealth of information on this Gesamtkunstwerk. Thank you, Tom Phillips. So what is a Gesamtkunstwerk? Well, again, thank you, Tom Phillips. At the back of each copy of a Humument, he has notes, and he explains various things. And he was a great pains in the 4th edition to define what he means. Not just a Gesamtkunstwerk, a Gesamtkunstwerk in small format. It includes poems, music scores, parodies, notes on aesthetics, autobiography, concrete text, romance, mild erotica, as well as the undertext of Malek's original story. That's not just the books. He talks bibliographically, right? He talks about how, he goes looking for the books. He talks about how he has worked through these things. Here's a page 33, which he talks about quite a lot. And as he says here, most projects that end up lasting a lifetime, and it's idle play. So he's not Mary Shelley, right? He's not pointing to this moment where he had this complete thing in his head. But in 1973, he'd gone through the book once and still wanted to do more. And then he took that copy of the book and amended it. There's a bit of that page scribbled out a bit and tacked onto the top of another. And he keeps going back and back and back. Where do related works come in, right? He talks about how he uses this quote from Westward Ho by Samuel Beckett, which, as he says, there was not even in existence until 16 years after 1966, when he first worked on page 33. And he roots this quote in his page 33. As years went on, you began to feel better, one of the most quoted bits of Beckett. Also, neologisms come in, right? In 2011, I can find both app and Facebook, which would have had no meaning at all even 10 years ago. So here's the 2011 edition with a nice picture of the app. He's launched an app, so he's great at marketing. And there's the original page from the first edition. And they're both echoing the work of another work. Should this be linked in some way? Here we've got Lawrence Stern's Life and Opinions of Tristram Shandy, where we had to picture her after our own mind. Right? So this page, in many ways, is Tom's response to that injunction. And yet there are pages that he couldn't yet rework. So he's just been content to introduce variations. He's proud of the fact that some nerd like me will never track down every bit. He's proud of the fact that nobody can pin him down, right? And I bloody like that. I bloody like that because the majority of writers are not Mary Shelley. The majority of writers before the Romantic era and the majority of writers after the Romantic era don't stand up and go, that is my thing, and here is the start of this thing, and here is the end of this thing. And definitely who doesn't do that is artists, right? As he says, as many bibliographical byways. And when he says ill-fitting boxes, he's talking about the lovely Tetra Press ones. So just to finish, here are some of the pages for those of you who haven't seen it before and those of you who have. So on the right-hand side, this is page 1 of A Human Document by W.H. Mallock. And you can see, for all of the editions until the final one, it was the first page on the left. So you can see what he's done there. It's quite straightforward. And then for the final edition, he changes it. So he starts off by claiming, the following sing I, a book of art, of mind art, and that which he hid reveal I. That's his artist statement for what he's doing to Mallock. And when he introduces the final edition, he pastes new edition, look at the typography there on the title page, onto it. He's making a statement. He's called these other things editions, but this is the first one he brands a new edition like this. And he says, I sing a book of the art that was. Now read on of mind art, though I have to hide to reveal. And I think, for me, as a non-art historian, but as someone who's steeped in all of this abstruse cataloguing theory and bibliographic theory, I kind of think that's the point. I kind of think that it's supposed to be playful. I kind of think we're supposed to have space to interpret things. And the last paper had great examples of fuzzy knowledge, where people have made interpretations. And you can't just say, well, that's what we used to think and this is what we think now. And I think artists and literary works in particular are all about that. They're not claiming a truth, they're claiming a version of the truth. And I'm not sure that it fits into a neat model of what a work is. And if we don't know what the work is, we don't know what the expression is. But we do know what the manifestation is, because it's the thing that comes off the printing process. And we do know what the item is, because it's the individual copy of that thing that we hold in our very hands. And I think if our mission is to provide access to stuff within libraries, the quicker we can get our workflow to describe that stuff, the better. And all of this stuff about what's a work and what isn't a work, do you know what? There are people filling ivory towers, and God alone knows I am now one of those people, who are paid to do this sort of analysis. And in the system side, and this is the last thing I'll say before I shut up, everything is about ethnographic research and what do the majority want. And the majority in terms of system design in libraries, the majority of customers are universities. The majority of customers within universities are undergraduates. They are not people who are sitting thinking about this. They are mostly, they might be, I was an undergraduate once, I don't think I thought about this even then. They are mostly looking for known item searching. Search is easy, right? Search is easy for undergraduate search. That's really why system vendors bang on about it. It's really hard. There might be one person in the world who's really interested in this. And if I was still a cataloguing manager, I wouldn't pay somebody money in the library to do that. Because guess what? The person who really needs to make these shades of decisions is paid a lot more money to waste their time figuring that out. And that's where I want to end.
Thank you very much, Aaron. That was a wonderfully critical and very amusing and insightful presentation. I really enjoyed that. I think that the three presentations were fascinating in the way that they balance practical approaches and understanding of day-to-day of library work with a willingness to engage with change and with theory and try to look at what is coming ahead. I feel very tempted to start talking about artist works, but I think that I should restrain from that. I guess a question could be, how, if each of you could talk a little bit about how you see the agency of librarians in particularly working in institutions in navigating these rules and trying to have some input. I mean, we're talking about RDA, and really has been literally no input whatsoever from from anywhere other than the very, very large national libraries and really large academic libraries and only some elite institutions and senior military staff. But I don't want to concentrate on RDA only. I wonder if the three of you can talk a little bit about this idea of agency and the role of the art librarian and the librarian in general in navigating these rules, and how do you think that we can have a voice or try to influence the way that some of these rules are developed?
So I think it's bigger than that. I think what all librarians do is advocate for their user group. And I think what's happened with the development of the standards in recent years has been a turning away from smaller user groups. And I think therefore smaller user groups have turned away. It's like a marriage that's gone really bad quite quickly. So one partner has decided that they're taken for granted, and the other partner has decided, well, if you're not interested in me anymore, then I'm going to go off and do my own thing. And so I think where there are designated communities, I feel that what we're really crying out for is a new edition of, we have Maria White in the room, and I think we need another edition that says, if you're working in this particular group, this is what cataloguing is about. I mean, when you look at older cataloguing books that are targeted at communities, and to be fair to ACR2, when you look at those editions, before we get to RDA, there's a great deal of discussion about users and what they need. I mean, Jewett was the one who came up with this idea that we could share records. He estimated 40%, which left 60% of the cataloguing still to be done. And part of that was because although they may have the same stock, they had different audiences. So I think it's about the things that we're already good at and confident at. And what I see is a lot of tech talk and a lot of, I love Karen, I genuinely love her as a human, but I think there's a lot of kind of front loading of this sort of language where it's saying this isn't controversial. And people in school libraries and art libraries and law libraries and all of the other places that have, I think it would be disenfranchised from Scylla as well. I could have gone, oh, well, that's not for us. But Karen, I'm not an art librarian. I was a law librarian, I could maybe advocate for that. Karen's not an art librarian. Do you know what I mean? I think it's about the advocacy skills that are in the room not being overpowered by the tech skills. And I think that is what really came out strongly in your presentation, was where you were talking about, if you want to talk to that, the kind of conversations that you had to kind of make sure that the art historical point of view is not intimidated.
Yeah, it's been a real challenge because the departments were all very siloed. So even though our software team is right there, they're not. They're focused on what they're doing, and they don't maybe ask us when as many times as they could. As far as CDOC, I have no. That's a level so far above my head that I don't have any really recourse to it. Besides putting my foot down when we really, really can't do something one way. The problem with CDOC is it's trying to be a model for everything. And it works very well for art objects, but I can't even imagine them trying to do a library. It's a type of thinking that is very difficult to do, and it's very, I always say it's like how Yoda thinks, because it's just it's really strange to try and think about it and to try and describe a book with all of CDOC, because there's almost unlimited linking. So how far do you go? You don't want to go so far that you can't use it. where's that line? And it's also new that I think we're figuring it out.
And I think that's the underpinning structure of RDA. My understanding is that it's to do with the way that triples work. Anything, and this is the issue, as we're moving towards this kind of world of triples. To say nothing of language groups for which triples don't work. So there's this idea that you've got a kind of subject, object, and verb, and that's pretty much all you have to work with, essentially. Well, some languages don't work like that. So I think there's an underpinning structure, and the linkage. I mean, this is what hopefully came across. Is like, how if you were looking for a Humument, are you actually looking for Tristram Shandy? Probably not initially. Every day I want a Humument, but not every day do I want Tristram Shandy. Am I looking for Beckett? Probably not. And am I looking for Beckett at the work level? No, because the Beckett stuff didn't come in until a later edition. So these models of kind of infinite linking that have been sold to us as a good thing, they're not wholly good, right?
I think that you can link so many times that it renders it useless. That you wouldn't be able to find it because it would be so specialized. So we're really trying not to do that. I think our rule is as much as necessary, but not more than that. So like if you're painting, like I had to resist the urge to like a painting that's landscape with cows to be like animals, cows, landscape, farmhouse, but is someone going to be doing that? Like, show me all the paintings with cows. I mean, maybe they will. I guess we have to kind of start where we're at, and then once we get the system going, there's been a lot more focus on the user research of, okay, well, what do they really want, and how can we do this so that we don't exclude, so that they feel when they search that they've found everything that they could have found, instead of feeling like something's missing.
Althea, I wanted you to add something about your truly radical approach to standards and processes, and bringing an artistic perspective into it as well.
Yeah, well, the whole point was to kind of break down the habits of finding and feeling overwhelmed with what the task is too. I'm a bit overwhelmed by the heat and stuff anyway. And to tackle it on that almost that one-to-one basis. I mean, Tom Phillips is a fantastic kind of example to use for this, because it is taking the material and drawing something new out of it, and the practice of finding things and facilitating people's access to, people getting something out of art documentation that they wouldn't have got out of it without a kind of intervention is sort of what you enact. I mean, you don't realize it as well. So the research was isolating a lot of different things, I realize in retrospect. It was instinctive initially, and it is born out of frustration of not having the kind of resources that you get and elsewhere. I mean, you're kind of just there with a little stuff, and at some point somebody's going to turn around and say, what is this? What is it, and why are we keeping it? I mean, it is that major question. And the image of the slide in the puddle that had been stepped on was the reality of a slide collection upstairs ending up in a skip. So, yeah, I know what I'm saying there, but it is practice having to be also looked at in terms of theory. I mean, it's all right for me to feel very isolated, but moving it out into methods and approaches was equally important.
And the connection between research and practice as well, isn't it?
Yes, but I presented this I presented at a conference about digital cultural heritage. And somebody who's Ross Parry, he's written a lot about museums, and he's overseeing some multi-million-pound project looking at digital in museum collections and libraries. And he said, it's not very often that that somebody is arguing for a collection not to be digitized in a way. I mean, here it is this thing that what would you actually be achieving? And so and he is at the point where we're at post-digital thinking actually. So yeah.
But that's language like coils, right? They're saying to somebody, well, this is an unusual perspective. Like, based on what? Do you know what I mean? Like, there's loads of perspectives that I haven't heard, because although I'm old compared to a lot of my students, I'm still only like in my mid-40s. So just because I haven't heard something, or I don't think something's controversial, doesn't mean that that isn't an opinion that lots of people hold. Do you know, it's probably more small libraries than there are big libraries.
Any other questions?
I want to comment on that, just because you have the resources or ability to do something, that doesn't mean that you always should do it. And the Getty can throw money at pretty much whatever they decide to, which doesn't mean that they should do it. And this project, my department is confused by it actually, because a lot of them have been around for a long time. And nothing's changed for 30 years. And so they say, why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? Just because we can, just because someone up there said this is what we're doing? And like the answer is sort of, well, yeah. Is linked data really the place we need to be going? Is it going to change in 5 years?
It's been 5 years in the future for my entire career at libraries, which is 26 years now. I'm still being told I won't regularly within
So we can finish with that wonderful note.
5 years in the future. I think we still need slides after.
Okay, I think it's time for lunch. If you can join me in thanking the panel again.